We are so pleased to be joined by Terry Foy, CEO of Inside Lacrosse. We've had him on the show before. Great friend of the program as we talk some Cuse lacrosse now with Terry. And, as Paulie just mentioned, Cuse drops from 1 to 6 in the media poll, 1 to 7 in the coaches poll. 6 different teams got at least one first-place vote this week. Was this one of the more difficult polls you had to vote in? And I guess give us your thinking. Who did you have number one, and I guess who was under consideration for you?
Yeah. So I had Harvard number one because now, as far as I'm concerned, they have the best win on the board, so to speak. And in order to have some internal logic consistency, I know your listeners aren't going to like this, but they're going to have to acknowledge the fact that this is going to change very fast over the course of the next couple of weeks. I actually had Syracuse at 9. They were my highest ranked team with a loss, which meant that the other 8 teams ranked ahead of them were all undefeated. And that was reflected, I think, in my logic for why I had Harvard number one. To the question of, is it the hardest that I can remember? I mean, to an extent, the short answer is yes. But I do think that there are some weeks where it's like you really kind of just get backed into a corner in terms of that internal logic, and it's impossible to make a decision. So you feel like you're going to seem like a fool one way or the other. With this one, the thing that made it more comfortable is everybody knew that it was going to be a chaotic mess. And so as a result, when I posted my personal vote on Sunday night, I was like, I'm going to get roasted for this, but that's fine. Everybody's going to get roasted for this. It's kind of part of the exercise.
Yeah, it made you feel a little better. There was some chatter going into the season about Maryland, Princeton, Syracuse being in kind of a tier all to themselves, and yet they all have at least one loss in the early going of this season. Is that top tier wide open right now? I mean, I guess when you look at teams capable of winning a national title, is it a double-digit number of teams at this point?
Yeah, well, so I just held up the cover of Inside Lacrosse, and it says wide open on it. This was our, face-off yearbook kind of whole claim. And I've been doing this since the 2008 season. And my contention is that the firmness of any preseason prognostication was as wide open as it's been in 18 seasons, or, whatever the number actually is. And I was among those who felt like there was a tier of a top 3, the 3 that you mentioned, Maryland, Syracuse, Princeton. And then I felt like Carolina was pretty squarely number 4. And then, Georgetown kind of led the tier of teams alongside Carolina and Duke and Ohio State, Notre Dame behind them. So I think to kind of roll it forward in the context of how many teams can you imagine winning the national championship? Yes, at this point in the season, this is a record number, right? And that's reflected in the fact that I think this is probably a record number of teams that have received a number one vote, or a number one, vote in the poll, which was 6 this weekend. So kind of spinning it all up, I don't expect that to be the way that the season finishes. I do think that as February turns into March and March turns into April, there is going to be separation. The thing that's going to happen is that stars are going to emerge, and individuals, whether they be stars or role players, are going to get better as the year goes along. And that coalescing is going to be what creates the normal, I think that there are 8 teams that can get to the Final Four. I think there are 3 to 5 that can actually win it on Selection Sunday. That is kind of the default position that we always end up in.
Since you bring up individual players, I know it's early to be having this discussion, but where does Joey Spallina fit into the National Player of the Year conversation for you? Do you think he's a favorite? Is he a front runner? Is he, someone who's on the list? I mean, where does he kind of fit into that equation for you at this point?
The reason that I think this season was so wide open heading in is because in this sport, star offensive players win championships. And while there were a ton of guys who graduated after the 2024 season, because that was kind of when the guys that were in the high school class of 2019, but basically just kind of how COVID affected things, it created what was kind of called that double draft class. it was also a ton of talent that graduated last year, certainly led by CJ Kirst. Joey Spallina is the best known quantity, known commodity in the sport on a good team. And for that reason, yes, I think he is the favorite. He was the favorite. He remains so. I think this loss to Harvard doesn't really change the picture for that very much. I think ultimately what would or will change the picture for individual awards in the Tewarraton are the other guys who are going to emerge, right? And I think that because the sample size of games played is still small enough, and you have, one guy who put up 7 points in one game and then 7 points in the other two games that he's played, now he's averaging less than 5 points a game. You know what I mean? It just hasn't really settled itself out on that basis. And even though we've had some big matchups and we've had some good performances in those matchups, they aren't necessarily building on each other. They're not necessarily stacking on each other. Certainly not to the extent that's greater than what Joey did against Maryland, where, the conversation coming away from that game was, well, there's the hater take, which is that he can't run past Will Schaller. And then there's the other take that I kind of sit on, which is, yeah, but he put up 5 points, right? And there just aren't really either very many or any guys in college lacrosse right now that can do both of those things. And so to me, Joey still sits atop the heap. Whether or not that persists is kind of the same thing that I said earlier about these teams and how the number one conversation progresses.
We had Paul Carcaterra on our show last week, and he warned SU fans about that Harvard game. He said it's going to be outside, it's going to be cold, it's going to be snowing. Harvard's good. Harvard seems to give Syracuse trouble. This is going to be a close game, and sure enough, it was a one-goal game, and it went Harvard's way. How surprised were you that Harvard pulled off the upset? And I guess how much is there to this narrative that SU's going to have another cold weekend outside against Penn and Princeton this weekend? I mean, how much is there to that narrative that Syracuse struggles in cold conditions?
Well, I wasn't surprised at all because all 6 Inside Lacrosse staff members picked Syracuse to win in our staff picks, which is absolutely the kiss of death. And whenever that happens, it means that the team that was unanimously picked is going to lose. As far as the matchup in particular, clearly this is one of the best budding rivalries in the sport. They've played 3 times in the last, 13 months, not even. And they've been 3 absolutely epic games. So, on that basis, it would be hard it just wouldn't be a respecting history enough if you didn't expect it to be a close, exciting game. And then as far as the outdoors thing is concerned, I think the facts suggest that you can't dismiss it. I also think that the relevance is pretty limited on 2 bases. The first is that they play so many games in February and early March inside because it's, number one, a very distinct advantage. It's also number 2, the reason to have a dome. I'm unabashed in saying that there is no better place to watch a college lacrosse game in February or early March than the JMA wireless dome. So, if you have those advantages, you might as well use them. But to the point about being leery of any particular game, I would just tell Cuse fans, get used to it. Gary Gate built a monster of a schedule, right? And it's the combination of the quality of the opponents, right? Even whether you've got your ACC opponents, you've got your kind of brand name non-conference opponents, or even the kind of non-brand name conference opponents that they've already gotten through, like BU, where they struggled to clear, and that was a storyline coming away, or St. Joe's, who they absolutely dismantled, but has gone on to now beat Villanova, who beat Penn State, and beat Towson, who beat Navy, who beat Penn State. So the point is that there's just so much meat on the bone here. There aren't going to be very many comfortable games, even though they're a good team. And that's why he built the schedule the way that he did, in order to be battle tested in May, so that when they play close games in the NCAA tournament, they have the confidence and familiarity with how to win them such that they can meet the ultimate goal.
Yeah, really good answer. What questions do you have, Terry, with this Cuse team right now? And again, as you said, smallish sample size. You've seen them play a few times, though, and against some pretty good teams. What is your biggest question mark with this team?
Well, I think the biggest question mark coming away from Harvard was short stick D-midi play, which I think was one of the big question marks for the team in general coming into the season. I think that some of those what were the question marks heading into the season have still persisted, right? We've seen some fluctuation at attack with Bear Anderson missing a game, playing up top, playing down low. That was one of the big question marks. Who was going to replace Sammy English? I wouldn't say that it was always going to be a by committee situation, to the extent that what we've seen is an indication of the fact that they haven't fully answered it. What I would point to is just the willingness to play multiple offensive midfields. I also think that question about short stick Midi, like that was another one that Sammy, could contribute to. And then I think you've seen equivalently, the other big question heading into the season was who's going to be the third defenseman. And you've already seen some fluctuations in terms of who's starting in that role as well. But with all that being said, it's why I'm still so bullish on Syracuse. Like, those are important and sometimes difficult questions to answer, but they are not as important as who are your best two attackmen, who are your best two defensemen, who is your face-off specialist and how good is he going to be, who's your goalie and how good is he going to be, right? And we've seen the answers to those questions. I guess we knew what the answers to those questions were coming into the season, and nothing that we've seen on tape so far tells us that those aren't safe, secure, quality answers that are the foundation for this team going forward. So, certainly Jake Spallina's absence against Harvard was a factor. My kind of indications are I expect he's going to play this weekend. Will he be 100%? I don't know. Developing depth there is already going to be a situation. And that's where somebody like Bobby Kittelberger, who I thought made some mistakes against Harvard as well, freshman mistakes. It's kind of what I'm pointing to in the context of like the team that wins on Memorial Day Monday is going to be the team that gets the most better over the course of the season. And you want to see guys like Kittelberger make those mistakes early in the year so that that's the foundation they can build on. It's what they can go through in film, in practice, get better, and be ready for prime time in late May.
Terry, you talked about the schedule that Gary Gates put together a moment ago. I'm sure you saw his comments that he would be a proponent of more midweek games, starting the season a little bit later, packing more into a shorter period of time. What's your take on that?
Fully in favor of it. My main point is I think it's time to move the championship back 10 days from Memorial Day weekend. I'm actually an advocate more of starting the NCAA tournament and playing 2 games in 3 days on that, call it, Friday, Sunday, Saturday, Monday alignment. And that then allows the other 2 things that Gary talked about to happen, in addition to a lot of other benefits. Number one, I think the Final Four attendance plateau, in my opinion, shows that the moment where that is the crescendo opportunity for the sport as an attendance thing has converted into now let's lean into what sports are, which is a television thing. So let's put the championship game on primetime on a weeknight. And then the other thing that a lot of people point to is the venues, right? And how many, or how few rather, appropriately sized venues there are for these pinnacle moments, right? Because the sport has not, after getting to the 50,000 range in the late 2000s, gotten back to the point where it can really threaten to sell out a 67,000 seat stadium. So let's target the 45,000 seat stadiums. And the problem is that those aren't professional venues. Those are college venues. Fortunately, 2 of the best venues in all of college lacrosse are in West Point and Annapolis, and they'd be great hosts for the semifinals. The problem is they graduate on Memorial Day weekend and they can't host NCAA semifinals and finals. If you move the tournament back a week, then they could host the semifinals on that first weekend in June. And I think that is the attendance crescendo for the sport. So that's really what I'm fixated and focused on. But, unfortunately, we have a little bit of an opportunity with the World Cup coming to Foxborough, giving the sport an opportunity to go back on campus, and that's what it's doing at UVA this year. We'll see what the early returns on, and then as bids start to come in to host the tournament in 2029 and beyond, we'll see whether or not reformatting becomes a part of the conversation, or if it's just a little bit of a status quo, play it as it lays type moment.
Yeah, certainly something to keep our eyes on. Last one for you as we get you out of here, Terry. Just what games are you most excited for this coming weekend?
Too many to list. This is going to be the best weekend of college lacrosse that we have all season. It's been that for basically the entirety of my tenure at Inside Lacrosse. And this thing that first Carolina Duke, now Carolina Syracuse do with the 2 games in 3 days situation with Penn and Princeton is absolutely awesome, because it straddles this Saturday that has, some of these like hidden gems. Ohio State, Georgetown is a battle of number 1 contenders. Obviously Notre Dame, Maryland is one of the best kind of series of rivalry, so to speak, that we've had in such a long time. And the list goes on from there. I didn't even mention Hopkins, Virginia, which is about as blue blood of a rivalry as you're going to get. So this is going to be the best weekend of college lacrosse. And I mean, the short answer is you got to figure out how to drink through a fire hose, because it's going to come fast and furious.
Yeah, no doubt. Terry, we love the insight. We always love having you on. Thanks for all you do for lacrosse, and appreciate you coming on. Hopefully we can talk again down the line here in the season.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Steve.
All right. Terry Foy, Inside Lacrosse